I'm going to just begin, and people will be coming in and out. And this is our second of the series. And thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday evening. We are really grateful that we can have such a diversity of voice to speak about really important aspects of the journey with cancer and how to overcome, how to be empowered, how to feel empowered on the journey. I'm going to mute everyone. So just Ileana, I know you have to unmute yourselves when you speak, just for the background noise. And tonight, I'm excited to share two of my favorite people. Anu, Kaur, and I have a beautiful long history, and we developed a program called Befriending the Journey with Cancer several years ago, and have done a few workshops and have done education around it, and we have more to come with it. But the nourishment and the yoga is such a beautiful pairing. And I am very excited that Anu will be sharing her wisdom with all of you. And Ileana is a sister in the yoga, and she holds the seat of the director of Ayurveda at Beloved, and has been a really big teacher for me to see how important the roots of Ayurveda are, and integrated with yoga, but as a lifestyle medicine, and which is a very important lens on the journey with cancer, to not just think of this as dealing with just cancer. It's a lifestyle that ends up being shifted and lived with and expanded and empowered. So I'm gonna turn it over to you both to begin this evening. So I give it to Anu first. Take it on first.
Thank you, Miriam, for that introduction. And I'm so excited to be here. Just a little bit of background. I don't know everyone here. So I'm a registered dietitian by training, and I've been practicing, I can't believe it, for 20 years. Where does time go by? And on my journey, I started having some psychosomatic experiences with yoga, where I noticed about 10 years into being a dietitian, the power of yoga on my body. And it really got me very intrigued, and I became a yoga teacher and have been really trying to bring this integration of yoga and kind of allopathic medicine, if you will. And that's my lens of always been interested in the science behind it, because that just, being in that world, I was very interested in. I was also having these personal experiences with knowing my wellness was changing when I had an element of yoga. And then I had my own diagnosis of cancer, but it was caught early, so I didn't have all the treatments like chemotherapy. It was surgically managed. But being in the field and having my own experience around it really, it's always eye-opening, right? It's one thing to actually talk about something, and then it's very different to experience something. And so what I hope to do is to take some time to talk about the integration and of these two elements in a way, and this idea of nourishment. So I'm going to get started with my screen sharing here with my PowerPoint. And I think, okay, let's see here. Okay, guys, give me 1 second. Okay, can everyone see the screen? All right, excellent. And everyone can hear me okay? Okay, great. So this idea of synergy around nourishing foods and this idea of healing lifestyle habits is, I think, the essence of everything that we're trying to do. And so I invite each of us, as we kind of join in community, to talk about this, just to take a moment to check in with yourself and just be intentional, because there's a lot of information that's out there. But I want you to also take this next hour or so to think about what you're doing in your life right now that is nourishing you, and what are some of the healing habits that you have. And perhaps in some of the things that we discussed today, it reminds you of something that you used to do or you want to do, or it's something new and you think about that. So I'd love to just jump right in. Oh, I'm gonna have to figure out how I want to. Okay, and start with this a book. Actually, I know Miriam and I both love this book. It's Anti-Cancer Living. It's by Dr. Lorenzo Cohen, and he's out at MD Anderson, I believe, in Texas. And this book is really wonderful. So I recommend it to everyone, but I want to take the concept, because it's a very holistic approach of this mix of six, this idea that connectiveness counts. Letting go of our stress makes a difference. And I'll say that first we have to recognize that we are stressed and see what is going on for us personally and how that impacts our daily routines. And this idea of sleep, I know when I was becoming a dietitian, we weren't as connected to sleep and how it impacts our health to the degree that we understand it now. And though it's not the focus of today, it's definitely something to recognize as something that's important for that healthy living, if you will. And I love how they talk about movement. You know, I meet many people and I've met many people. We all have different relationships, not only with food, but also with how we move. And exercise can actually sometimes be a word that isn't appealing to everybody. But this idea of the joy of movement as something that we add into our lives can be very powerful. And then where our focus is today is on finding foods that can heal. There's this piece of the toxin patrol, and that's important. Again, perhaps a little beyond the scope of all the things we're going to be talking about today, but nutrition does make a difference in getting the toxins out of our bodies. And we will kind of go into that. So in this cartoon here, where you can kind of see everything, it's a very busy slide, but I wanted to share it because it's by the American Institute of Cancer Research, and I want to give out resources. They have a great website. They've got great nutrition information. And this is kind of the blueprint that we know based on the studies that have been done over the decades, what in lifestyle is going to help us to beat cancer, so to speak, or at least keep it at bay, because cancer is a chronic disease, which means that how we are living can impact how that comes into our lives. Being a healthy weight is something that can be important. It's not being, and I say healthy because it doesn't have to be that you're super skinny or you're overweight. Like, that balance for you is going to make a difference. How we are physically active, that joy of movement is going to be important. And we're going to dive into all of this a little bit deeper. So I won't read everything here, but the idea that, you know, a diet that's rich in nutrients in certain foods makes a difference. Because one of the big things people always talk about, you know, we cut out certain foods, and for some people that is appropriate, but it's not for everybody. But in its essence, food is a very powerful healing element for us. So this other piece, I will just say, you know, sugar is a really hot topic. I always love to focus on what we want to add in, but what we do know is when there is food that's really highly processed, it typically comes with a lot of calories, and that can impact. And now we do also know that alcohol is something that we want to be thoughtful about, and how much we add into our regular intake. So we can come back, and if you have questions, again, we will have time at the end to go over that. So what are we kind of learning about cancer? It's this malfunction of our genes, so to speak, and that there are genes that can, you know, help with the cell growth and division. And if something is off and it's getting replicated, that's cancer, right? It's getting more and more, and we got to take care of it. And what can influence that? Our genes can be influenced by diet, physical activity, stress, and inflammation. It can influence cancer. And what we also know from nutrition clinical trials is that we have an insight. And this insight is that all individuals do not respond identically to diet or dietary components, but we have trends. We have an understanding of what can be very helpful. And so this idea of genetics and epigenetics, genetics is what we're born with. Epigenetics is kind of the turning on and off of genes. And we know that nutrition can make a difference with that. So Dr. Brown from Dana-Farber has a quote that I really like. He says, in cancer, both defects in the hardware, gene mutations, and bugs in the software, epigenetic alterations, play major roles. And so when you look at this tree here, you can see that all these things that we deal with in our lives, different conditions, they're not, the root cause is a whole bunch of how we live. And these are the things that we have some control over. And that's what we want to take some time to investigate and explore with some curiosity around what we can do. Okay. All right. So I always love this cartoon because I feel like it's been a little bit of my experience. And this gentleman saying to his doctor, "Don't tell me to improve my diet. I ate a carrot once and nothing happened." This idea of a quick fix, or not even a quick fix, but this desire to see, we all have different thresholds, so to speak, of when we're making a change in our life and when we want to see something that's different. So what does it really take? And I think that's where there's this beautiful blend when we take a holistic and an integrative approach and combine even how we're eating with something like yoga can make a big difference. And I'll dive in a little bit more with that. But what we do know is that the body has a defense system. It has an antioxidant system. And I know many people have heard of this word antioxidant, and it's basically this, and I'll tell you, it can be a vitamin, a mineral, a phytonutrient, and we'll talk about that. But there are nutrients that can act as antioxidants because the human body has evolved to protect itself from free radical damage that happens at the cellular level. So these are substances that protect against harmful cell damage from oxidation. And does that mean? It means that our body, all of us, by even just breathing, we create free radicals. And then when we eat certain foods, that can help us and protect us. And in the last 20 years, what we've learned is, in particular, we have more knowledge on phytonutrients. And these are the cancer fighters. Phyto is the Greek word for plant. And these are biologically active chemicals which are found in plant foods and our body can use, and they protect our cells, and they can protect our body from having damage that can lead to that reoccurrence of cancer. So, I think so many of us have heard about blueberries being good for you, or ginger being good for you, some things that we're going to talk about. And it's not only the vitamins and minerals, but it's the phytonutrients, these bioactives that make a difference. And they work in certain ways, right? They stimulate our immune system, these phytonutrients, or anything that's working as an antioxidant. It can decrease inflammation that makes cancer more likely to grow. Some of the DNA damage that we see, just part of aging even, can be helped with. There's some DNA repair that can be going on. We can reduce the kind of oxidative damage to cells that can kind of proliferate cancer, or we can slow down the rate of cancer cell growth. So this again comes from the American Institute of Cancer Research, and it's something that the basic scientists are studying and giving us insight around this. So how does this play out for all of us when we are managing stuff? There are changes that happen to us, as many of us know, whether it be for us personally or for those that we love. If you're a caregiver, when someone goes through surgery, there can be musculoskeletal weaknesses or imbalances that can happen if you're laid up for a while. If you're dealing with something like chemotherapy, there can be long-term digestive issues that come up, or internal scarring from radiation, or just general sleep disturbances. There are a lot of side effects that can happen as we get our treatment with cancer. And then I think the question becomes, what is it in our healthy lifestyles and our habits? What can we do? And one of the things that I wanted to start with was weight, because it is about being a healthy weight. Again, even having a certain amount of weight can be protective. So it's not about being too skinny. It's about finding that, I think, moderation. It always comes down to that. But what is important to know is that genetically, some of us are prone to gain weight more perhaps in our abdominal area, others in our hips as pears, so apples and pears. But we also know that when we do get a little bit more abdominal fat in our abdominal area, that it can work as almost like a hormone pump, releasing insulin, estrogen, and other hormones, which can just cause a sort of inflammation and create an environment, if you will, where cancer is more likely to occur. So having that healthy weight is important. And it's this whole link of body fat, hormones, and inflammation that can happen in the body. And so we do know that there are certain cancers that are more likely to be impacted by weight and reoccurrences happening. But what do we need to know? Sometimes there's an increase in estrogen production. There's an increase in leptin, and these are hormones that can promote cell proliferation, or they may not inhibit the programmed cell death that we want to see. Because if a cell is replicating and it's not supposed to, our immune system will take it down, so to speak. But sometimes that is inhibited. Now, there is a protective hormone, adiponectin, and that can actually help with insulin resistance and inflammation, and it can help those cells that need to die. They will. That's programmed cell death, apoptosis, as they say. What is interesting is that with mind-body modalities like yoga, we know that adiponectin is increased. So this idea of holistic, taking a holistic approach can go a very long way. So I wanted to just take a moment to talk about reframing. There's this whole mind, body, spirit kind of connection. And I feel like one of the things I've observed so deeply with individuals is this idea of really reframing and understanding that there may be a new normal. And that new normal can mean that you might be the healthiest you've ever been, or it can be that there's got to be a little shift and we have to allow for a pause. Because even I'd heard somewhere that even every year of treatment, it takes 1 year of recovery where you really feel kind of getting back to yourself. And this idea of really focusing on how we can impact and improve our immune function, that's where nutrition really comes in. And lastly, this idea of really nourishing ourselves in all aspects. And how do we do that? How do we connect to nature? And this idea of forest bathing is actually something I had first been introduced to at Duke University. I'd gone down to Duke and I was working with other allied health professionals, and they were just bringing up the research about, when you are out in nature, what the trees are actually putting out there in the air. It's almost like what you can inhale, like inhaling phytonutrients. So I think so many of us feel grounded when we are in nature, and it's just this understanding of what nature is providing for us. So I like to offer a pause here for a minute and just to think about that for yourself, for each of us. How do you ground yourself on a daily basis? And this idea of how is it even moment to moment for you? But just if you have a pen or paper, or just make a mental note and just think about that. How do you take a moment to ground yourself? And I'm going to clue you in. I know breath is an important thing for me. We'll take some time to do that. Breathe together collectively. All right, so I kind of want to dive into this part of the presentation, because this is the thing that I do with people, this idea of getting really nutrient-rich meals. And I always do this slide as wherever I can, typically, because it just gives us a framework to be on the same page. And then we can play with this, but there's this idea of macronutrients. Those nutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrates. They provide the body with energy. Then we have micronutrients, fat soluble vitamins and the water soluble vitamins. And they can work, these micronutrients don't have calories, energy associated with them, but they're very powerful in how they work at the molecular level, at the cellular level. And they typically come in sources of fiber, so plant-based foods. So this idea of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients are really important. And then water, obviously, so much of our bodies, the majority of our bodies is made of water. And this idea of this being an essential nutrient in how we nourish our body. So every diet that we ever hear about, you know, and there are many cancer diets, which is beyond the scope of today's topic, really, in the sense of all the details of them. But I will say there are variations typically around the macronutrients. And when people are trying to lose weight, they're typically doing some variation of the percentage. That's why I put the percentages in there of fat, protein, and carbohydrates. What we need to know, what do we need to know about this? There are fats that can be very healthy for us, such as the polyunsaturated fats, which are the omega-3s, the omega-6s that we can get from some plant-based foods like walnuts or fish. And our body doesn't make these fats, actually, so they're essential fats. Then we've got monounsaturated fats, which are the avocados. So saturated and trans fat, we tend to do in moderation. And the balance of it, right? So healthy fat can not only make us feel satiated, but it does so much in our body. And so we want to have fat. You know, there was this whole, as many of us know, you know, this public message of really decreasing fat, but not really kind of recognizing the quality of the fat and how that does make a difference. Then we have protein, 10 to 35%. And I will actually say, I think I did this percentage also for how I would like each meal for an individual to look at. So when you're eating a meal, it's nice to have different macronutrients. And then the carbohydrates, having complex typically means it's got the fiber. And fiber makes a huge difference on our microbiome, our microbiota, the good bacteria in our gut. And that is something that we are studying with cancer. And it's so incredible at how important our microbiome is. So just take this in. This idea of moderation is really what I'm talking about. And this idea of understanding macronutrients and micronutrients because of the way they work in our body. And of course, we don't eat nutrients as people. We eat food, right? We eat it culturally for joy. So how do we do that? And this idea of wholesome eating. I love this little boy here. He's kind of taking it in, smelling his orange here before he even eats it. But this idea of their bioactive food components is something to still recognize when we are eating, and how we choose to bring food to the potluck that we're going to can be something we have choice around. So I just picked some of the bioactives that are being studied, like the beta carotene that we find in green leafy vegetables. Curcumin is the bioactive aspect of turmeric. And I've got mine here. Someone had gifted me this beautiful turmeric, and I know Ileana is going to speak to this with her recipe, which I'm so excited about. And then we've got things like lignans found in flaxseed, the omega-3s, omega-6s, lycopene. So the point here is there are thousands of bioactives, thousands of them. And the more nutrient dense food we are eating, the more we are going to impact our immune system. So I could go on and on about the list, but it's all, you'll notice it's the plant-based foods in particular with the phytonutrients that make the difference. And so we each have to find how do we put these foods into our lives? And do we eat differently on the days that we're stressed or compared to the days when we're grounded? I heard somewhere that typically most of us eat 7 to 50 different types of food. And I was like, you'd think we'd eat so much more, but diversity is one of the main things that we really want to add into our day-to-day. Okay, so again, let's take a pause. nourishment, this idea of what does nourishment look like for you? That is a very personal question. And now just say, think about what comes up for you, for each of you, when you think of the word nourishment. And then this idea of what does your plate look like? This idea of, can we go to local foods? I talk about sun foods with my clients, this idea of the plant-based foods, something that grew in the earth. So I feel like so many of us are really good about getting our protein and our fat and our carbohydrates, but you could still do that combination and not have a plant-based food on your plate because it's something that's been a little bit more processed. So where's that vibrancy? And I love this picture of this mineral broth, which Rebecca Katz, who's a registered dietitian, she has this beautiful website. I highly recommend, if you're interested in good recipe resources, to check her out, RebeccaKatz.com. But this idea of really getting vibrant foods on your plate. And you know what? If we look at the research, all those things I was showing you earlier, in many ways, it's the absence of processed foods. And we do have to just see where each of us are at each moment, each day, each week. No one is going to probably do none of that, right? And if you are doing that, it's probably taken some time to cultivate that aspect. And that's where I really enjoy working with people on that, meeting myself, meeting everyone where they're at with self-compassion and really thinking about, how do I make a change that's sustainable? But what we do know is that there is strong evidence that when we're consuming fast foods or, quote unquote, this Western diet where it tends to be a higher fat content and usually on the saturated fat, that it does, the sugary drinks often play a role with that too. And it causes this weight gain. And then you get this whole cascade from the hormonal cascade leading into inflammation, which impacts us at the cellular level. So this point of, how do we be discerning? How do we find our own delicious, healthy foods can make a big difference. And if you've gone through treatment, there are sometimes taste changes that can happen. And this idea of using, fat, acid, salt, and sweet to change some of that up can be very important and very helpful in doing so. So this salad is so beautiful. I think this kale has been massaged and there's pomegranates on it. Miriam has a thing with pomegranates, as I do. And I think it's butternut squash. In fact, I think this may even be the salad we'd made at one of our classes that we had done together. And I hope that looked beautiful to you. And it did take a little bit of prep, but not too much. And what we can do when we are making other foods, this idea of spices, the global flavors, that can make all the difference. I just made salmon, and I was born in India, and I threw some garam masala on my salmon. I had like 3 minutes, to put this together. And that type of flavoring, right? Garam masala is a mixture of different spices, from cinnamon to black pepper, cumin, coriander seeds that have been toasted and then ground up. And it was just so flavorful. And what's interesting about spices is that they're like 1,000-fold more powerful in their bioactives. So you don't need a lot. And that's one of the things that we find out, like even with turmeric, very popular anti-inflammatory, right? Decreasing the inflammation, but its bioavailability is a little bit less. So we do know when you mix it with black pepper, it's a little bit more bioavailable, but large doses is not always beneficial. So there's a balance to that. And we have different spices. I kind of pulled out, this is one of the spices with curcumin, thera-curcumin, that does have a little bit more bioavailability because they've taken some of that into consideration. But dosing it's interesting. We have to do that thoughtfully, and it does depend on where someone is on their cancer journey. But the point is that if you can add these spices in small doses uh, for each meal, you're going to find yourself not only enjoying the flavor of a food, as you can see here, the global flavors, there are different spices that are used in different cultures more regularly. Most of these have anti-cancer properties. Just looking at saffron, and there's a whole list of them. Mint, there's so many different spices that have some bioactive component, and that's why they're so medicinal. So what do we do then? And I'm going to be thoughtful in time because Ileana is going to be doing some stuff here too, and I want to have some time to just breathe together. But this idea of having a wholesome plant-based food diet can make a difference. And so that doesn't mean that everyone needs to be vegetarian. There's obviously all this research that shows us that the plant-based foods are they help for all the reasons I've just mentioned. But this idea of shifting, I think this perspective and thinking perhaps if you do eat meat, to consider it as a condiment. So it's only 1/4 of your plate and not necessarily as we traditionally used to do, especially here in the West, was, half your plate of that. So thinking instead of filling up 2/3 of your plate with fruits and vegetables, plant-based foods, can make a difference. And the real difference is because you get the fiber. So when you get fiber, it helps with the bowel movement, especially if you're drinking more water. And as a result, you're getting toxins out with that bowel movement. So this idea of like protection with colon cancer, right, is so important with the foods that we are eating. And I think most of us know we feel different. And Ayurveda is so good, the science of life, so to speak, in talking about things like what helps us, like bowel movements, our hydration, what we're eating, how we're feeling. All these elements are super important. So the last thing I wanted to speak to as far as nutrition goes is on how do we drink? What do we drink? Like I said, there are certain cancers that are going to have an increase. Typically, if it's more than 1 glass a day for women, 2 glasses for men. We know that breast cancer, colorectal, stomach, liver, and the throat cancer, those typically we see an increase in risk if that happens. So this idea of drinking mostly water can be something that is very powerful. Lightly sweetened, it's not to say you can't have something sweetened, but what does lightly sweetened look like and taste like to you? Things like green tea has so many phytonutrients in it, and the smoothies that we make can make a huge difference because you can put all together so many of those plant-based foods in your smoothie. So in 2011, Time magazine put this mindful revolution picture up, and it just was so interesting to me because it's become a cultural icon now, right? To be mindful. And I think when I work with people, and this again is a moment of pause for each of us, I want each of you to think right now, if you're going to eat mindfully, have you created time to eat? And it sounds so basic, but so many of us are so busy, self included, and we're running. And so, given your schedule, perhaps you were inhaling your food at that moment. And this idea of like creating a lifestyle that allows some time to eat. My colleague and I were talking about it. She's like, a snack you should plan for 20 minutes and a meal a minimum of 30. And if you go to, Europe, it's like 2 hours. So what is it for you? How much time do you allow to eat so that you can be mindful and you can eat with your senses? You can notice your bites, connecting with your breath, not just during, but before, during, and after. And then cultivating this idea of awareness and noticing it, jotting it down. If this is something that you're not doing, taking some time to really look at that can be eye-opening. So a little science before we jump into our breath exercise here. Rest and digest and restore. So this idea of the bioavailability of food and the digestion happens when we are relaxed and we are getting into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response. And Otherwise, if we're rushing and we're inhaling, we might be more in sympathetic energy, and that does make a difference in digestion. So what I'd like you each to do is just take a moment to ground yourself. If you're seated and your feet are on the ground, just notice your feet on the ground. Maybe you notice your back against your chair, and just take a moment to notice your breath. And if you feel comfortable, take this moment to close your eyes, and let's just notice our breath in this moment. Take 2 more breaths just like that. Nothing, you're not changing anything. You are just noticing your own breath. And allowing the muscles to relax around your face. And if you feel inspired, you may inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth, a sigh of relief or just a sigh. And notice how that feels for you. And if you would like, you can place your hand on your belly. You can even place one hand on your chest. So you notice as you're inhaling, perhaps that lift in your chest. And your abdomen's coming out. And when you exhale, you're gently pulling your abdomen in and up and getting all that carbon dioxide out. And if you can, pay attention to how long your inhalation is and your exhalation, because we know we go into parasympathetic mode if our exhalation is a little bit longer. So whatever that is for you, perhaps it's an inhale for 2 and an exhale for 4, a count of 4. Just notice what that is for you, what feels comfortable, and how does that inhalation or that elongation of your exhalation, how does that feel in your body? Getting into soft and deep belly breath. Embodying just you in this moment. This is rest and digest. This is what we can do before, during, and after. When you're ready, I invite you to just join back. And what we were doing is a mind-body intervention, something as simple as breath as that. We're stimulating our vagus nerve. We can change over time if we do things like this. If we get into parasympathetic, we decrease those inflammatory elements, the cytokinins, which are linked to cancer. And we can have that decreased stress, perceived stress. And then we do know that there's a shift even in glucose levels and insulin, improved mood and sleep. So there's a connection. There is this integrative approach that we can connect to our breath for healing. So I'll leave you with this. It's this idea of compassionate self-observation, and really taking it in with that breath. And as I wrap up here, I did want to bring up one of my favorite pictures here is this beautiful woman who's over 100. The Okinawan's, they're in the blue zone, where these are these certain areas in the world. Most of you may have heard of this. Some of you may have heard of this. And they are living more individuals are living more. And what are they doing? They are eating till their stomach is 80% full. They have daily practices that connect them with something that is meaningful for them in their life. And they have this group law, they have a support system, and that can really give us the support that each of us needs. These are part of the healthy habits. These are the pillars of our self-care, our exercise, our movement, that healthy weight, We're nourishing ourselves through our diet. Sleep is super important, and our healthy nervous system, which is that parasympathetic nervous system. We will always oscillate between parasympathetic and sympathetic, but it's how we bring ourselves back to that relaxation response, especially when we are eating, so we can get into rest and digest. And so I'm going to turn this over to Ileana. Ileana, should I take a few questions before we? Yep. Okay. But I do want to just say this idea of recovery, rest, and vitality is so important, especially when we're managing a chronic disease like cancer. Acupuncture has been shown to be so helpful with the energy, but to help with from nausea to sleep disturbances. Ileana is going to speak to Ayurveda. This idea of mindful walking, and I would say this idea of forest bathing. Can you get yourself to some trees and to some forests? Thinking about our sleep hygiene, and also this awareness of our circadian rhythms, these natural biological rhythms. And that's a lot of what I think Ileana's information will help us with, because all of this really helps us get into a recovery place, rest, and then moving into vitality. So community, what we're trying to do is create community. And I'll put some of this information in the chat box, my contact information. And this idea, if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, how do we do nutrition to nourishment, so to speak? There's the science, and then there's the nourishment aspect. So with that, any questions or comments from anybody? Let me just go ahead and stop this. Any questions?
I don't see anybody's hand up.
Okay.
I don't see any questions in the chat, so yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, great. Well, I will turn it over to you, Ileana. I think this is a beautiful segue into the stuff that you are going to teach us and give us a demonstration of. So excited.
Yeah, so the lens of Ayurveda just adds on other layers and expands our lens. A lot of it is very much in line with what you already mentioned, especially when it comes to connecting nature, and that's really probably one of the main things that Ayurveda teaches us is that we are a part of nature, and vice versa. Nature is a part of us, and so therefore, in order to live in harmony, we should try to live in harmony with nature. And probably one of the most common or the easiest way to do this, and Anu gave a beautiful example about forest bathing. This is more like literal, like I'm stepping outside and I'm touching my feet to nature. What I'm referring to has to do with the circadian rhythm. So whereas Anu really touched upon the what to eat and the why we want to nourish our body in a certain way, Ayurveda focuses on that other piece of the when and the how. And the when is really important, and even talking about research and science, the research and the science has shown that the circadian rhythm plays a huge role in our health and well-being, not just when it comes to sleep, but also when it comes to digestion. And digestion, of course, is that really important piece when it comes to nutrition and nourishment, because in order for our food to be properly transformed into that nutrition and nourishment, we have to have an optimal digestion. And Ayurveda is very specific about not just what it means to have optimal digestion, but also how to maintain optimal digestion. So the foundation of this is that circadian, the circadian rhythm. And we also know that things in our lifestyle, as far as that circadian rhythm, they're all related. So your sleep also affects your digestion. So how you sleep at night is affecting your digestion. Like for example, like we know that melatonin is an important hormone in the digestive rest period at night. So we're learning more and more about the circadian rhythm, but Ayurveda has been talking about the importance of this rhythm for thousands of years. So when we look at the Ayurvedic version of the circadian rhythm, it really all it's saying, it's breaking the day down, it's breaking it down into intervals of 4 hours. And if you're not familiar with Ayurveda, these words will not make any sense to you. The Vata, Pitta, Kapha, the doshas, that they're not going to make any sense to you, and that's okay. That's not the point of tonight's talk. The point is simply just trying to plant a seed as far as trying to be more conscious, right? And we've been talking a lot about mindful eating. And part of mindful eating is being really conscious and aware that there are certain times of the day where your own metabolism is going to support you so much better than at other times of the day. We know that there are times of the day where your metabolism is working a lot more efficiently, where it's a lot stronger, and that means that it's going to work less to transform that food. And it all comes down to energy, right? If your organism is expending all its energy on trying to transform food, then that energy, that energy reserve, you're going to have less of it, right? For the other things that need to be done in the rest of the day. And so one of the common effects of this is we feel low energy towards the end of the afternoon, right? Because our metabolism, which is responsible for our energy reserve, is expending it on digesting our food. So really, this Ayurvedic component is more about the when, and why the when is important. And it really speaks to giving the digestion the rest. So traditionally, the cutoff time for having food is at more or less 6 p.m., but really think more in terms of daylight versus darkness. So your metabolism is more active at daylight, and it is resting in darkness. And so again, we just want to take advantage of this natural energy that your metabolism has at certain times of the day. And this is, this requires a mental shift, because this is not something that we really, our culture doesn't really teach us this. We don't learn about it in school, and our parents probably, we grew up on different schedules, and even now it's hard sometimes for it to be compatible just with our day-to-day, because of course we live in a society, in a culture where we're just running around, and we have our work, and after work we have all sorts of other commitments. So this does require a mind shift, and it also requires time. But these are the things that Ayurveda, in this 5,000 year wisdom speaks to the importance of living in sync with the rhythms of nature. It also talks about proper intervals. So if you follow this clock, we have basically like an interval of 12-hour fast and 12 hours of food. So the fasting period and the eating period, they are kind of like working together to support overall digestion. And we also want to be careful about the intervals in between meals. And so again, like this is just another piece of that mindfulness that we bring to our nourishment. And we want to use our senses. And those photos that Anu had on her slide just really speaks to what that means, right? Because I mean that the slide that she had of the kale salad, I could smell it. Like I could literally just smell that salad. I couldn't just, if I close my eyes, it's like I had it in front of me. And this is what food should be like. It should appeal to all of your senses. It should look beautiful. And of course, when we eat, when we focus on whole foods, we get this kind of plate, right? The plant-based, all the different colors. It should appeal to the sense of smell. In Indian culture, even now, you eat with your hands, right? Because that's just another way to experience the food. So just really always encourage people to make their food appealing in every way. Surrounding yourself with good energy is absolutely important. You want to avoid negative emotions, not just while we're preparing food, but of course, when we're eating food, and try to surround yourself just with positivity. Never bring any arguments into the kitchen or into the dining area. Try to keep that outside. Avoiding distractions is a big one for us because our culture just really doesn't focus on things like this, right? I always tell the story of how I was eating at a restaurant. I was by myself, and at this restaurant there were 3 other tables where people were also eating alone. And at each of those 3 tables, that person was holding the phone in one hand and just shoving food on the other hand. And I think we've all done that at some point, where you eat while you're on the phone, answering emails at work. So I hear so many times from people that it's very difficult for them to step away from their desk, especially now probably during COVID, where you're like probably eating and working in the same space. But distractions, first of all, it doesn't allow you to eat mindfully, and it also leads to a lot of overeating, because by the time you realize it, when your plate is empty, you have that feeling of just having eaten too much. And again, it has to do with that positive energy. You just want to focus on your food, and really just use it as a moment of mindfulness. Use it as a way to practice what mindfulness teaches us, which is interconnection with nature and interconnection with other living beings. One of my favorite practices is by Thich Nhat Hanh, who really teaches this idea of interconnectedness when it comes to our food. And I always think that this is so beautiful, where you think about every living being who it was involved in bringing that plate of food to your table, right? the farmer who had to till the land and plant the seeds and tend to the harvest, the truck driver who brought it from the farm to the market or to the store, the person at the store who had to unload and put it on the shelf. And like, when you think about this network of other beings who make their living, from bringing food to your table. So it's this kind of practices that just elevates the experience of eating and just really expands, right? This nutrition and nourishment into a practice of mindfulness. And all of these things are important in a journey, such as cancer, but really it's a beautiful thing to really think about as your day to day, and just make it a habit, right? Make it a practice. I always teach about how food, anything about food, whether it's cooking, or eating, how that in and of itself can be a ritual. It can be a way to show reverence for yourself and for divine. So it's actually a way to practice, spirituality, right? And so again, like that's the lens of Ayurveda. It's more about the when and the how, and even the where, right? Even making sure that you have a dedicated place in your home that is only for eating, that is that your space for cooking is clean and inviting, right? Because cooking is important. Making our own food, it's like it's a prescription for health. It's a prescription for healing. So it's a really important act to show up for yourself in that way. I think I see is there a question in the chat? Yes.
No, it's a comment actually.
Okay.
The comment was that it was really insightful, the idea of positive energy and preparing, when preparing and eating.
Yeah. And I even, and this is again, like this is something that we really have come away from in our modern culture, or the way that our modern life is set up, where we see the shopping as kind of like, I have to go shopping again for my family, and like even that is an opportunity for you to show up for yourself, and that also can be a practice of mindfulness. I always teach people to give yourself the time to shop. It is as important as when you are in the kitchen preparing your food. Like, give yourself that time. Read the labels. Avoid the center of the store and stick to the margins. It's important what you bring home because when you're home, when you bring this stuff home, like then you have to make choices, right? About what am I going to cook? And if you're starting with your baseline with some staples that hit all of those things that Anu showed on that slide, that has the macronutrients, the fat, the protein, and the carbohydrates, right? And don't be afraid. Fat and carbs are not a bad word. They are essential. They're essential macronutrients that provide energy. So really take the time, to go shopping and plan your meals.
Well, I was just going to say, what an interesting theme, right? Like, I think when we work with people, right, Ileana, like this, and even for myself, this idea of creating the space to have the time to eat, having the time to shop, and how do we get mindful? I mean, I'm kind of curious, do other people ever feel like they do have enough time to shop and eat, or is it just me?
Yeah. No,
Um,
again, that's just the way that our modern life has been designed, right? And we didn't really ever have a say in it. I mean, we somehow just got pushed into this vortex, right? Of I'm too busy, you know, thanks to Instacart and thanks to you know, Amazon and you know, yes, it's convenient. I'm not arguing that it's not convenient, but you're missing that piece. You're missing that piece of having agency over your food, like overall over your nutrition. And this is also something that I always teach people. Our diet is one of the few things that we actually can control. It is one of the few areas in our life where we actually get to choose, and we actually get to say yes or no. We make these decisions, you know, several times a day. So that being the case, like, why wouldn't you really take it seriously?
Yeah, well, you know, it's such a powerful thing to when we give ourselves that permission to breathe. You know, for me, in my experience, it's like when I take that breath, when I take that pause, that's when I can perhaps make a different choice. And I think this element of self-compassion, even while we're doing it, you know, I feel like often we might, if you've picked something, whether it be from Instacart because you were there, you brought that bag of chips, you know, or whatever that food is that you're more likely to finish, right? Like I love crunchy, and it's like, oh, that is the thing that I probably should just not bring in too often, you know. But even if I'm doing that, even in the midst of doing that, asking some of those questions like, oh, what do I need right now? Because am I eating, you know, because I'm stressed? Am I eating because I'm really hungry and this is quick? Am I eating because this is just a food that makes me feel very like it's my comfort food? All those the pause with that just makes such a difference in the energetics and that idea of even savoring it, right? If you did decide to dive into the bag of chips, you know, savor it. You'll slow it down.
Just enjoy it. You're already there, right?
Well, when you start to savor, I think you slow down. I think that the very nature of what that is, you know, is just a key thing. And Sarah's got a comment here for us. Agree, this is really important to get back to mindful eating and being aware of that we are eating for nourishment. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone would real quick comment on what nourishment means to them, or if there's a word or feeling that comes up.
Well, for me, if you don't mind me just popping on,
You.
hi. I feel as though nourishment, we're a bunch of plants running around that are wilting, basically, because we think of a plant and we think, just like my mom the other day, she had this beautiful orchid and she just took perfect care of it. And then she said it died. And after like a year or so, and I'm like, did you feed it? And she's like, I watered it perfectly. I'm like, no, did you feed it? And so I think that especially when you're sick and you're tired and you have laundry and you have dishes and you have people you want to invest in and you have projects and you have all these things you're trying to do and you wake up on 1/4 a tank. And so the eating, sadly, is the thing that a lot of times gets pushed because we can't buy laundry super quickly, right? We can't order laundry to be done. That's actually harder. It's so much easier, but so much harder. But we can order kava. We can order, from just Amazon Fresh or whatever, because it's the easier thing to do. And like when I went to Mom's the other day, which is like my second home, me and the produce people actually cracked open a palma something, because none of us had ever tried it. And it was like a grapefruit and an orange, and we all tried it. And it was this really great moment of community as well. So I think that this is especially hard for people who are sick, because they don't have the energy and they spend it on other things trying to help. And then they don't nourish themselves, which is the most important thing. And so we're walking around wilted, and we're orchids, and we're dying.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Miriam.
Gonna add in, sorry, I had to make a adjustment to come home. I'll just speak from just a lens of a yoga therapist and working with individuals, that it is like Jennifer, you said it really well. It is one of the things that's pushed off, but it's coming up more and more in cancer care. And there is, and I really appreciate Ileana adding this Ayurvedic lens, because sometimes it can be a lot of effort to shift the nourishment, like what you're eating, but there can be other things that you become aware of that enhance the process of nourishment, that enhance the appreciation of food. And I want to acknowledge that. I'm just going to say, as a caregiver, and when you're on the journey of cancer, sometimes Instacart, these services are so important and so huge. But to know that you're kind of stepping out of that ability to be with food, but one day you will be. But I also want to just give a little love for those services that help you have access to food when you can't go shopping. Because it's just been very, I want to say, impactful, but I miss that, being around those edges of the grocery store, as Ileana was speaking to. But I want to just acknowledge that on the journey with cancer, like that's what's amazing. Those services are available so that you can access some of this grounded nourishment.
Yeah. Thank you, Miriam. And I think Jennifer, when you gave such a visual, like right when we're wilting, and I love plants, and then I might be away, and then I come back and I'm like, oh my God, they're wilting. And then it's that idea of like, what is it for each of us? How do we water ourselves? How do we feed ourselves? And I think it starts with the awareness of noticing something has wilted, right? If we can notice it, then we can have that agency to just ask that question, what do I need? What do I need? I think is the most self-compassionate question. And I think it was Kristen Neff, who's a self-compassion researcher, and that's something she says, because if we know what we need in that moment, then we'll either order the Instacart, or we'll go to the grocery store, or we'll just, pull out a Trader Joe's. Whatever it is that we need, though, that is awareness, and that is self-compassion. And I actually really appreciate you saying that. It makes me think of my plants in my house, and it happens often enough where they're wilting. But when I nourish them, right, to see them perk up within a day is also something that that gives me hope, I guess. But thank you for sharing. And I think Ileana's ready for her
Yes. And also, I mean, the piece of nourishment, can you hear me okay? Okay. That piece of nourishment is a long-term investment in ourselves. So it's definitely not something that we do, just when we're sick. But it is definitely an investment in our longer term health. So yes, of course, compassion and always doing what you need in that moment. And then on those, when you are feeling up to it, when you are healed and trying to move forward, it's definitely an area that is going to make a huge difference in the long term. So speaking of nourishment and giving yourself what you need in the moment, golden milk is a really, really good option. And you'll get the recipe, but you can look up recipes for golden milk online. There's so many different recipes. So there's really like no right or wrong way to make golden milk. It's basically milk in which we put spices. And the reason why it's called golden milk is because traditionally, the basic traditional recipe has turmeric, right? And of course, Anu spoke a little bit about why turmeric, and there's so much research on turmeric and its component curcumin and why it's so powerful, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. So it's just like a good way to get this, the power of turmeric. It's a delicious way. So think of it as more as the milk is a vehicle, and you can use this vehicle to carry anything. So I'll kind of walk you through the way that I like to make it. You can use any non-dairy milk or milk, so whatever your preference is. If you're plant-based and you only do plant-based milk, I'm doing oat milk, but you can use, or preferably if you do use dairy milk, I would highly recommend that you do the whole, all the fat milk. And by the way, yes, as Anu mentioned, black pepper is one way to deliver turmeric, but also fat. So you want it, fat is also another way to really deliver turmeric. So again, like try to use the whole milk. If this is too heavy for you, so if you know from your own experience, right, as you observe your own digestion and you know that the milk is just a little bit too heavy for you, then you can definitely water it down. I personally prefer it not watered down, so I don't usually add water to mine. And you can use like maybe a cup of the milk and then half a cup of the water, or half and half. This is your golden milk. You make it the way that you like it. So we want to bring the milk to a little bit of a boil. So you're just gonna put it on the heat until it starts boiling. And then in the meantime, you will prepare the spices. So the spices that come in the recipe that I'll send you are ginger. So you can use fresh ginger or ginger powder. Whenever you can, use the fresh. It's always better to go with fresh. And when you take fresh ginger, you can grate it. So there's different ways to grate it. You can use a spoon to kind of peel away. This one is a little bit drier, but you can use the spoon to peel away some of the peel. You can continue using the spoon to grate it. So if you just take the spoon like that, it comes out grated. Or if you have, a small grater or a specific grater for ginger, you can use that. I eyeball things. I am not really like a recipe follower. So the recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon, but it's winter, it's been a little cold. I always appreciate the little extra heat. So I'm just gonna eyeball it, and I'm gonna add would say it's probably going to end up being about a half to 1 full teaspoon. So ginger is another one of those spices that really has the anti-inflammatory properties. And it has the heat that you need on a cold day. It also, of course, helps to increase your digestive power. So I'm going to add that, and then cardamom. So if you've never seen fresh cardamom, it comes in little, I don't know if you can see, it comes in like these little pods. It's very aromatic. And what I usually do is you can use a mortar and pestle just to smash them a little bit. You just want to open them to just release some of that aroma and release some of the little pods that are in there. So when you open it up, there are these little tiny seeds in there. It's really aromatic. This is one of my favorite spices. I actually use it to replace sugar. Me personally, I find it to be a really good sweetener. So I'm just gonna smash it a little bit here because I didn't bring my mortar and pestle. So you just smash it just to open them up a little bit, and I'm gonna throw them into the milk. And it's not quite boiling yet. So as I said, a good way to deliver the properties of the turmeric is either with black pepper or with a fat. So you can do one or the other. The black pepper, of course, is pungent, which means it's going to give you a little bit more of the heat. It's also good for releasing any mucus that you might have in the digestion. If you have any congestion in the chest or even the sinuses, that a little bit of that pungent can really help. So you can add a little bit of that pepper. I'm not going to do pepper, but you can then add the fat. So you can add ghee. You can use a little bit of ghee or a little bit of the coconut oil. So again, that also will depend on your personal taste, and it also will depend on your constitution. So if you are, like more of a kapha constitution, like me, you have to be, you might want to use just a little bit less than other constitutions. But any kind of fat is going to give you a lot of nourishment. So, and this is one of the benefits of golden milk also. It's a really, really comforting, nourishing drink. It's even, for the times where your appetite isn't really where it should be. You don't think that you could really have food. This is a great alternative because it's super nourishing. It's super comforting, right? It's the warmth, it's the spices, everything about it is just comforting. When you think about like a cup of golden milk, you just think of, I'm just gonna sit like, in bed with my blanket and just sip on my cup. So it's just like even mentally, right? It can be really calming and soothing. And traditionally it is done at night. So especially if you have trouble sleeping, again, it's just like a really good practice at night. So the traditional recipe calls for the turmeric. So I have powder here, but you're welcome to use fresh turmeric if that's something that you already have in your kitchen. And you're just gonna start stirring it. Once it starts boiling, just let it simmer for a little bit. Not too long, just like a couple of minutes, let it simmer. And you can add, in addition to the turmeric, you can add saffron, or you can do saffron instead of the turmeric. So like For example, if you were, turmeric is not indicated like before surgery, because it can increase the risk of excessive bleeding. So if you're preparing for surgery and you can't have turmeric, you can add saffron. Saffron is also a really good alternative for as a sleep aid. So if you know specifically that you need a little bit of support with your sleep, then saffron could be the better choice. Or you can do both, right? So the saffron, as you know, just a little bit goes a long way. So just 2 or 3 of the little stigmas are enough. And some other spices that you are welcome to experiment with are cinnamon. So remember, the milk is really a vehicle, right? And there's no right or wrong way. This is your drink that you are preparing. So just kind of like depending on what you need in the moment. There are lots of herbs and spices that are that really help with nausea, with anxiety. Cardamom actually ticks both of those boxes. Cardamom is a good anti-nausea and anti-anxiety. Nutmeg is really good for anxiety. What else do I have here? You can use cinnamon sticks or ground cinnamon. And then some other things that I also personally like to put in mine are things like almonds. So the unsalted dry almonds, can put some in there. So, again, like when you don't really feel like you can have a full meal, but you need nourishment, right? Because that nourishment component is so important. You can use nuts. I like to put dates, so I'll just cut up the dates and put it in there. You can use raisins. Cashews are also good. So there's lots of different ways that you can dress up your golden milk. It's very, very easy. It'll take you not more than 10 minutes from start to finish. You can also pre-make a paste of the turmeric. So you just use you'll just take turmeric with a little bit of water, or even like with a little bit of the ghee, and just make it into a paste and store it in the fridge. And then all you have to do is heat up the milk, stir in that paste, and then that's your golden milk. So like any practice, you can spend as much time as you want on it, but enjoy. And yeah, I'm gonna get a cup for my golden milk.
Well, you're bringing back so many memories. So my grandmother used to do this every night. And if you do it with traditional milk, the tyrosine is the amino acid that helps you go to sleep also. And it's so funny when you were saying that, because the dates is just definitely something that it's just that little bit of sweetness that can go just such a long way, especially with the almonds, or it can get pretty filling. You're right. It's like a good evening.
And you can also sweeten it with honey or maple, whatever sweetener that you normally like. Of course, you can use that as well, because that sweet taste is what gives it that really comforting, calming, soothing effect. And that's part of the medicinal value of golden milk.
And with the saffron, I was actually just reading some recent research from 2020, and they were talking about how saffron has anti-cancerous properties. But what some of the big stuff is what will happen if you're in chemotherapy, like what can you have? So what was fascinating was it had anti-cancerous properties on cancer cells, but not on regular cells, which that is pretty amazing. It was like in vitro and in vivo. So like they weren't clinical studies, but nonetheless, it gives us information around it. And I just thought that was amazing to just the bounty of nature, so to speak.
The intelligence that's there.
Yes. Well, I did want to just read one comment that was put up with Sarah had made an interesting point around, about this conversation that we were having earlier about how it brings to mind how in this vortex that we were put into, as mentioned, that employers don't always respect lunchtime. And so we do have to find a way to set boundaries to be able to eat while calm and, basically putting our health first.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good observation. I've had so many clients who are like, you know, I've had to put a sign up and I've had to tell my boss that, yeah, you do what you got to do. You got to take control, you know, of that piece of it.
And I have found a lot of employers are more open, perhaps even in the pandemic, to have some of these conversations. You know, I've had several clients myself who've actually said, hey, you know, I went up to my boss and I actually spoke to them about it. And, you know, it kind of, in some ways, it makes you realize, do you want to work somewhere or not? Right? It's like, you know, how is someone reacting?
As you ask in the interview.
Right. How are they?
On lunch.
But well, we have 5 last minutes. Thank you so much, Ileana. That just looks so good. I wish we could all virtually join you here. One of those. But I wonder if anyone would like to you know, pop on the video or share any last, or chat, whatever is good. Holy dates. Is that Jennifer? Holy dates? Batman. This is, oh, you're are you having some? She might be enjoying some right now. Thank you for sharing. But any last thoughts or comments as we wrap up here? I know so much of this is around creating community, and the fact that we have so many people present for us to talk about this is just, it's heartwarming, honestly. I think it's something we need to do more of, really.
For sure.
Agreed. Yeah, it'd be great to see some of you, but if you have any just even appreciation, let us know. And I think, did you put your information in the chat?
I just put some of my stuff in there. So Ileana, if you have yours too, if you want to add that in when you get back to your computer. But you know, so one of the things that I've been doing is writing. I'm trying to do more on some of the spices just because I think it's so interesting. So cinnamon's coming up on my blog in the near future. But this idea of creating community, and one of the things that I've been trying to do is I'm actually going to be doing a pilot to do more online. So if anyone's interested, give me a call. I put my phone number in there. It's going to be significantly discounted, so you can be my beta as I do my stuff, but really wanting to create this idea of nutrition to nourishment. We've got the science, and then there's the Ayurvedic aspect that Ileana so beautifully shared. And, you know, more and more allopathic medicine is integrating this into the way that they're doing the research, which is unbelievable because it's been 20 years in the making. And they just are starting to give new funding from 2021 to 2025, which is just so exciting. It's someone who's been in the field to see this integration come together. It's what we need, you know, it's really what we need. Ileana, anything from you or Miriam?
No, I just put my my contact in the chat. I'll be back on the 13th, so 2 weeks from today, to talk about the power of touch during this journey. So hopefully I'll see some of you then.
Yes, and the next week is the one with Susan and I on yoga therapy and cancer. And Susan has actually piloted one of the most innovative bedside cancer programs in the country that has just received an endowment to continue yoga therapy at Shar, which is just incredible. And so this is so significant that it's being recognized. And so we'll be sharing some of the information, but I'll just say that the first thing, the conversation is always food first, because we can move and breathe and do all those wonderful things. But it really, in the journey with cancer, there's a nourishment that's needed because the medicine can be so depleting. It's just how it works. And so it's finding balance through our nutrition and the wider perspective on nourishment. So thank you, Anu and Ileana.
And there's a question also about the recording.
Yes, I will be putting it up on YouTube, and then I send an email to everyone who's here And then, because they both of Anu and Ileana, you both want to share some information. So we'll share it with you and then the link for the recording as well. Yeah. Huge gratitude. Any other questions, thoughts?
Well, can I say something?
Please.
I had cancer in 2006, and it was cervical cancer, and it was surgically removed. So I'm fine, but one of the things that was just really outstanding and really was more helpful than anything was the community. I was working, in a dance studio, and I mean, I was just blown away by all the people, that reached out to say they cared or did this. But one of the things they kept doing was bringing me food. And they kept bringing me food. And it wasn't necessarily the most healthiest food when I look back on it, but nevertheless, they were bringing me food, and it was like just such a beautiful gesture. I guess I was just kind of really depressed and not in a good state. And, I don't know, but I guess they knew I wasn't like to go to the grocery store. I just wasn't doing it for myself. But anyway, so we're talking about food and how important that is, but that came from the community. Without the community, I wouldn't have had the food, or just emotional food too. They were just like really with me.
Well, Jenny, you're so right. Like, it's like food is how we show our love. It's how we show our nourishment, and it's so comforting, I think, because of that. And it mind, body, spirit, right? It literally can do all of that. And to your point, I've been working with people to even have that conversation around what type of food you may want when you're going through treatment. So it's interesting because people want to give, and often they don't know what. So if we give them a little bit of guidance, even, I find that people are so grateful that you're even sharing. But it's culturally, we don't, we're so grateful someone's bringing us something who wants to be, picky and say, this is what I want. But there's definitely now, I think, some beautiful language and just, asking for some of that. It can be so powerful. But to your point, I think it's so beautiful that a community came together and supported you in that way. And you remember it years later, right? Years later, it has stayed with you. Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, and the other thing it did too was, I've led my life not asking for any help, that's so stupid. But anyway, and it was like that, just them reaching out was really absolutely changed my life. Now it's like I see how destructive that is. We all need help. I mean, what was I doing? I don't know. I guess I just wasn't worth asking for help, but they just came. And you know what? I remember somebody brought me some Cheetos. And it was like, it was like, just, it was the way it was given and everything. It was like, they were delicious. I still remember those terrible Cheetos. They were delicious at the time.
You savored them. You savored them, Jenny. That's what you got to do. Some of the stuff you just got to savor.
I'd just like to say thank you for your bravery and saying that, because I think a lot of us were taught not to impose. And I was really independent and didn't ask for enough help. And it's sad because connection is the kryptonite for that type of despair that you get to when you're in treatment. And you feel so horrible, you can't find a way forward. And I'm so glad that you said that. Very important. Don't ever call yourself stupid again. None of that. Okay.
We're all each other's teachers, so beautiful.
Such good love. Yeah, that book you shared by Dr. Lorenzo Cohen. Yeah. The first chapter, the first mix of 6 is community. And
Mhm.
recently I've had clients come in that their doctors say, we won't begin treatment until I know you have a community that's supporting you.
Yes,
Like
I've heard
that
that
is
too.
really
Too.
beautiful. That kind of progress.
Mhm.
So huge. Beautiful. And this is what this is about, community. Yeah. Anu, Ileana, anything you want to close up with? Anything specific?
No, I think this idea of the sharing is my favorite part because you know, as we think about this, when we feel isolated, when we feel down, when we can reach out, we're really talking through we're nourishing our nervous system, right? And just this and our heart, our mind, body, and spirit. And I feel like I always just learn so much from people when they share because that's where the juice is, you know. I think it's in the sharing. So thank you for everyone for showing up and sharing. And Ileana, thank you. I love, you know, I'm allopathic trained, but I like to say Ayurvedic inspired because that really helps my world of clinicians to dive in. And so there is so much research on what Ileana was saying. They're just starting to get funding on the when and the circadian rhythm, and I'm hearing scientists talk about it differently, and it's so nice because Ileana, what you're sharing is, you know, the how, and that just is, it's what we all need, you know. And so thank you to Miriam for bringing us together also.
Thank you. So we end with a beautiful Jai to Anu and Ileana for their loves. If you can unmute yourselves and just send forth that beautiful energy with a big Jai. So a nice inhale. Jai! Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Anu. Thank you, Ileana,
Absolutely.
sharing that beautiful wisdom.